It started on a Tuesday, which still surprises me. You expect these things to happen on a Friday night after too much wine, or maybe in the hush of a Sunday morning when the world moves slower and people are easier to touch. But no, it was a Tuesday. The kind of dull, soft gray day where everything tastes like lukewarm coffee and the mail is just coupons and bills. My name's Evelyn. I turned 53 last winter. I've been married to David for 28 years. We live in a respectable two-story colonial on a quiet street in New Jersey, with shutters that I repaint every other summer and flower beds that bloom late and die early. We're the sort of couple people assume will die in the same bed, holding hands. We even go to church on holidays, take our vitamins, and attend neighborhood barbecues with practiced smiles. But long marriages have a certain silence to them. You stop noticing it. You fill it with chores and grown children who only call on Sundays. You lie beside someone each night, so close the skin of their arm warms yours, and yet you feel alone. It's not his fault. It's just how things settle. Passion wears down like the threads of your favorite sweater. Familiarity rubs away at the longing until all that's left is comfort. I didn't mean for anything to happen. I need to say that, if only once. I didn't go looking for it. But I also didn't run when it found me ... It started when Leo moved in. He's my stepbrother, technically. My mother married his father when I was already 26 and living with David in our first apartment. So Leo and I never grew up together. I don't even remember meeting him at the wedding reception. I was too busy trying to keep my uncle from drinking all the champagne and my cousin from crying in the coat room. Over the years, I saw him at the occasional Thanksgiving or birthday gathering. We'd nod at each other, maybe exchange a few words about traffic or weather. He lived in Oregon, some vague IT job, wore expensive-looking glasses, nice teeth. But when his dad, my stepfather, died last fall, things changed. Leo sold the house, quit his job, and announced that he was moving back east for a while. It was casual, offhanded. Just until I figure out the next step, he'd said at the wake, standing beside me with a paper plate of cold pasta salad and grief dulling his blue-gray eyes. David, generous to a fault, offered our guest room before I could even blink, and that was that. He moved in 2 weeks later with just 3 suitcases, a sleek laptop, and a habit of staying up late. He was 9 years younger than me, but he looked younger still. He ran every morning, made protein shakes, and worked shirtless in the backyard sometimes, as if unaware of the effect his lean, tanned body had on the universe. Or maybe he knew. Maybe he knew too well. At first, I tried not to notice. I truly did. I went about my routines with the discipline only a woman in her 50s can master. I folded laundry, scheduled dentist appointments, did the grocery run. I'd catch glimpses of him, though, in the hallway, the kitchen, standing barefoot near the fridge in just his boxer briefs, pouring orange juice like it was the most normal thing in the world. And I began to notice things. Like how he always made sure to ask how my day was. How he made actual eye contact, listened, and then said something funny or warm. I noticed how his hand would brush mine when we passed each other, and how he didn't pull away quickly like most people do. How his cologne smelled faintly like cedar and salt. One night, David fell asleep early. He often does after working on his spreadsheets. Leo was in the den, watching a film I half recognized. I wandered in with a glass of Chardonnay and sat on the opposite side of the couch. He looked over at me, smiled that lopsided smile, and patted the cushion beside him. I hesitated, then sat closer. That was the first moment something changed. I didn't say anything, neither did he. We just sat, our shoulders nearly touching, watching shadows move across the screen. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with something I hadn't felt in years possibility. 2 nights later, he joined me in the kitchen while I was slicing strawberries. David had already left for the office, and the morning light was slanting across the counter just so. I was in my robe. Thin, cotton, nothing special. Leo leaned in, reaching for the coffee pot, and his hand brushed my waist. He didn't move it right away. I turned toward him. He didn't look away, and that's when I kissed him. God help me, I did. I kissed my stepbrother in the morning light while the coffee still steamed and the clock ticked loudly on the wall. It was supposed to be one kiss, but it never is. That morning was the beginning of a slow unraveling. The fabric of my life, my careful, respectable life, began to tug and fray, but I couldn't stop pulling the thread. Every look, every accidental touch became a conversation without words. Every time David left the house, the air thickened with unsaid things. And then it happened the first time. I'll tell you about it next. It happened 3 days later. David had taken the car in for servicing and was going to be out most of the morning. I hadn't planned anything special. I was wearing jeans I'd had for 10 years and a loose white top I used to save for brunches, but had long since demoted to housewear. My hair wasn't styled, just twisted up in one of those plastic claws. I hadn't even put on lipstick. Leo was in the backyard, barefoot again, sitting on the deck stairs with a mug of coffee. It was late April, and the trees were just starting to green. There was birdsong in the air, warm enough to skip a jacket. I stood at the kitchen sink for longer than I needed to, pretending to scrub a plate, watching him. He had a book open, one leg stretched long, the other bent under him, his knee brushing against the railing. He looked like he belonged to a different world, entirely unhurried, unburdened, untouched by the kind of quiet loneliness that had settled into my chest like dust on unused furniture. I stepped outside with my own mug. I didn't ask if I could sit. I just did. He glanced over at me. "You always smell like vanilla." I laughed, a little surprised. "That's my conditioner." He nodded slowly. "It suits you." There was something in his voice, quiet, unfiltered, heavier than it should have been for that kind of comment. I felt it slide under my skin like a warm hand. I sipped my coffee to distract myself. "What are you reading?" He tilted the cover toward me. The unbearable lightness of being. I smiled. "Of course. You're one of those moody types." He grinned, boyish. "Only when I'm thinking about you." There it was, not a joke, not casual. A soft, serious, almost reckless truth that hung in the air between us like smoke. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, really looked. The tiny lines at the corners of his eyes. The faint stubble he hadn't bothered shaving. The way his gaze didn't flinch. "Leo." "Don't," he said. "Not unless you want me to stop." I didn't speak. My throat was tight. Not with fear, but with anticipation. With years of suppressed wanting and the shock of suddenly being wanted back. He set the book aside, took my mug gently from my hands. And then he kissed me again, deeper this time, sure, his hand resting at the side of my neck, thumb brushing under my jaw, like he was memorizing the way my pulse trembled beneath my skin. It wasn't hurried, but it wasn't soft either. It was weighted with something that had been building quietly in the corners of every shared room, every glance, every word left unsaid. We didn't speak as he led me inside. Not to the guest room, his room, but mine. The door clicked softly shut behind us, ... He kissed me again in that stillness, and I let him. I let myself. His hands were respectful, tentative at first, as though asking permission with every movement. But then I touched him back, ran my fingers up under the hem of his shirt, felt the muscle shift beneath my palm, and something in him shifted. He pressed into me, mouth tracing down my neck, breath hot against my collarbone. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind of it howling in my chest, and instead of backing away, I leaned forward. The clothes came off one by one, not ripped or tossed, but peeled slowly, reverently, like we were unwrapping something sacred. And maybe we were. His body was warm and taut against mine, and when he moved inside me, it wasn't just the physical sensation that unraveled me, it was the fact that I felt seen, desired, craved even. My hips met his with a need I hadn't known still lived inside me, That wasn't perfect. We fumbled a little, laughed quietly when he bumped his knee on the nightstand. But it was alive, honest. There was no pretending, no years of expectation. No need to dim the light or cover my belly or worry about time. When it was over, I lay beside him, one leg hooked over his hand stroking absently up and down my arm. We didn't speak for a long while, and when we did, it was nothing profound. Something about how he liked the smell of my pillow, how I had a freckle behind my ear he hadn't noticed before. Later, when he left my room, I sat alone on the edge of the bed, the sheets still warm from where his body had been. I should have felt guilt. I didn't, not then. All I felt was something loosening inside me, some old, tight thing that had been cinched for so long I'd forgotten it was even there. A part of me had come awake again, and I didn't know if I wanted to send it back to sleep. Of course, I knew what I'd done. I knew the implications. I wasn't stupid, and I wasn't naive. But I also knew that when I walked past Leo in the hallway that night, and he reached out to brush his fingers lightly across the back of my hand, I wanted him again. And I would have him. Again and again. David didn't notice a thing. He was knee-deep in year-end projects, spreadsheets that consumed his evenings and stress headaches that earned him early bedtimes. We went on publicly, as always. I cooked. I made polite conversation. I smiled when his colleagues came for dinner. And in the shadows of that carefully maintained life, something raw and honest bloomed between Leo and me. We became thieves of time. We learned the rhythms of the house, the length of David's meetings, the sound of the garage door, the way the floor creaked near the bathroom, Sometimes we didn't even speak. A look across the kitchen, and I'd follow him upstairs like it was a compulsion, my hands trembling slightly as he closed the door and pressed me against it. Other times it was slower, in the laundry room, in the car. Once, outrageously, on the floor of the pantry. It wasn't just sex. That's the part people never understand. It was connection, electricity, the reminder that I was still wanted, still interesting, still seen. But that kind of secret burns at the edges. It wants to be discovered. Or maybe deep down you want it to be. I didn't know it yet, but a storm was coming. And all fires eventually get found out. Summer came fast that year. One day it was chilly mornings and sweaters over breakfast, and the next it was cicadas in the trees and sweat trickling down your spine while you watered the garden. The sun hung low and lazy above our street, making everything feel thick and suspended like we were moving through honey. I kept thinking that the heat would make things slow down between us. It didn't. If anything, it made them worse. We started pushing the boundaries. No longer content with stolen moments behind closed doors, we found new ways to test the limits of what could go unnoticed. A kiss stolen while David dozed in the den. A hand slid beneath the tablecloth at dinner. Leo once bent down to retrieve something. I dropped during breakfast and kissed the inside of my thigh before anyone noticed. He made me reckless, but I wasn't innocent either. I encouraged it. I flirted back. I wore dresses without bras. Left my bedroom door slightly ajar. I texted him when David was upstairs shaving and wet. I watched him read the message, eyes darkening across the room, his jaw tightening as he excused himself to the hallway. He met me there 2 minutes later. We didn't even speak. He just pulled me into the corner near the coat closet and hiked up my dress. It was thrilling. It was dangerous. It was unsustainable. I started forgetting small things, burning dinner, double booking appointments, snapping at David when he asked perfectly reasonable questions. Something had to give, and it did. Not in a dramatic Hollywood-style confrontation. There was no lipstick on the collar, no late-night discovery of texts or panties under the bed. It started with a question. We were at dinner, just the three of us. I'd made salmon with lemon and dill, one of David's favorites. The table was quiet, forks clinking, water glasses sweating onto their coasters. And then David looked up. Have you two been spending a lot of time together lately? The air tightened. Leo didn't even blink. A bit. Evelyn's been showing me around. David nodded. Just seems like you're close. I swallowed, kept my tone light. Well, we live together. Hard not to be. He smiled at that, but it didn't reach his eyes. I suppose. That night, he didn't kiss me goodnight. Just went to bed with his phone and the TV remote, and I lay awake beside him, heart pounding. The next morning, I found Leo in the garage, shirtless and leaning over the workbench. His hands were stained with grease. He'd been working on the lawnmower. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. He suspects something, I said. Leo didn't look at me right away. He wiped his hands on a towel and then finally met my eyes. So? I blinked. So, that's your response? I'm not afraid of him. Well, I am, I snapped, louder than I meant to. Not because he's dangerous, because he's a good man. And I'm hurting him. Leo set down the towel. You don't owe him your life just because he's decent, Evelyn. My voice broke. I married him. He stepped closer. Yeah, but do you still want him? I couldn't answer. Leo moved in, slow, deliberate. He cupped my face in his hands, and there was none of the cocky heat of before, just something fierce and raw in his gaze. You can stay in a life that fits like an old shoe. Or you can choose something that makes your heart race again. Something messy. Something real. His kiss was different this time, less rushed, more final. When he left the garage, I stayed behind, gripping the edge of the bench, breath shuddering out of me like something had cracked loose inside. I spent the next few days trying to be normal. I woke up before David, made his coffee just right, folded laundry like a wife should, called my daughter in Vermont, told her about the garden and the neighbor's new dog. I almost believed it myself that I could go back. But Leo didn't pull away. In fact, he seemed more certain, more present. He started cooking dinner some nights, pouring me wine without asking, pressing his hand lightly to the small of my back in full view of my husband. It was bold. It was reckless. And it was working. David started asking more questions. Did you take the car out last night? I thought I heard voices in the hall. Was Leo up? Where were you this morning? I called for you. My lies started stacking like dishes in a sink no one bothered to wash. I hated myself a little more each time, but I also hated that I didn't want to stop, and then came the weekend trip. We were supposed to visit my sister in Pennsylvania, just the two of us, David and me. A couple's getaway, a desperate attempt to rekindle. I packed a bag dutifully, told Leo we'd be gone 2 nights. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, long and slow, as though memorizing me for later. David drove. We talked. The road was long and hot, and the AC barely worked. Somewhere around exit 42, he asked, Are you happy, Evelyn? I stared out the window, heart thudding. Of course. You don't seem it. I looked at him then, his profile familiar, gentle, unchanged. He wasn't a bad man. He hadn't done anything wrong. He simply stopped being someone who saw me. I reached over, touched his hand. I'm trying. That night, we stayed in a guest room with twin beds. My sister's house was small and cluttered, filled with her cats and the scented incense and old books. David fell asleep quickly. I lay awake in the other bed, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzing quietly against my thigh. It was Leo. I can't sleep without you. My breath caught. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. When we returned, everything looked the same but felt different. Leo kissed me before I even got through the door, just inside the hallway while David was still unloading the bags. I missed you, he murmured into my neck. I let myself melt into him just for a moment, and then I pulled away because I knew what I had to do, ... Something had to end, either the marriage or the affair, but not both. Not yet. I didn't sleep the night I got back, not because of guilt. That had become familiar by then, like background noise you eventually stop noticing. No, I stayed awake because I knew the decision had reached its edge. I couldn't straddle both lives anymore. Something inside me, some long-neglected, quiet part, had grown loud, unignorable. I had crossed too many lines to pretend anymore, and I didn't want to pretend. Not with David, not with Leo, not even with myself. The morning air was soft. One of those early summer days that tricks you into thinking everything might still be okay. I made coffee, barefoot in the kitchen, still in my nightgown. The birds were loud, the sunlight casting long slats across the tile. David came down in his robe. He didn't speak at first. Just poured himself a cup, added the sugar exactly the way he always had, and leaned against the counter. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Is it him?" My breath caught in my throat. "I don't want to be wrong," he said, "but I know I'm not." I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said finally, voice barely audible. He closed his eyes, swallowed hard. "I think I started losing you years ago," he said. "Maybe I just didn't want to admit it." I stepped forward, gently, like every movement could break him. "David?" He looked up. His eyes were glassy, not angry. Not even surprised, just tired. Devastated in that quiet way only good men can be. "Do you love him?" he asked. I hesitated. "I don't know yet," I said truthfully. "But I know I don't love you the way I used to." That was the wound, not the affair. The fact that I'd spoken it aloud. The confirmation of a truth he must have known for years. He nodded once. "Okay." And then he walked out. Not out of the house, just out of the room. But it felt like a door closing all the same. That night, he slept in the guest room. We didn't fight. We didn't scream. No plates thrown, no ultimatums. Just a heavy, aching silence that wrapped around the house like fog. Over the next few days, we began the slow process of detangling. He stayed civil, respectful, even. We talked about logistics, the bank accounts, the house, who would move out when. He told me he'd never tell our daughter the truth. That was his final act of love, and I believed him. I waited until he moved out before I let Leo sleep in my bed again. This time, it wasn't secret. There was no rush, no urgency. Just his fingers trailing slowly over my hip as I stared at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the life I had lived with the one I was now choosing. "This isn't just lust anymore," he whispered. I turned to face him. "I know." He touched my cheek, brushed my hair back. "I don't expect you to be anything you're not. I just want you to be real with me." "I don't even know who I am right now," I said. He kissed my forehead. "That's okay. I'll help you figure it out." We didn't move in together right away. That would have felt too much like jumping from one box into another. I needed space. I needed to be alone for the first time in decades, truly alone, with no one expecting anything from me but honesty. Leo respected that. Sometimes he stayed over. Sometimes I stayed at his place, but there was no pressure. No timeline. I started seeing a therapist. Told her everything. The affair, the marriage, the ache I'd carried for years without ever daring to name it. She didn't judge me. She told me I wasn't a bad person, just a woman who had spent most of her life doing what was expected instead of what was true. And that hit me like nothing else. I joined a pottery class. I started taking long walks in the mornings. I reconnected with an old college friend who lived a few towns over. I remembered what it was like to choose how I spent my time instead of filling it with obligation. And through it all, Leo was there. Not perfect, not always easy, but present. He challenged me, pushed me, made me laugh when I was drowning in doubt. Sometimes we fought. Sometimes we didn't speak for days. But he never looked away. He never flinched from the parts of me that were raw and complicated. One night, months later, we were on the porch. A bottle of wine between us, the stars thick above the trees. Leo leaned back in the chair, legs stretched out. "You still think this was a mistake?" he asked. I thought about David, about the life I'd built and left behind, about the guilt I would probably always carry, no matter how justified the choices had been. "No," I said. "It wasn't a mistake. It was messy. But it was honest." He nodded. I looked at him, really looked. The curve of his mouth, the kindness in his eyes, the man who had seen me before I remembered how to see myself. And I realized something. Love doesn't always arrive in neat packages. It doesn't always show up in time to save you from yourself. Sometimes it sneaks in through the back door, wearing the wrong name, taking a form you never expected. But when it's real, even if it costs you everything else,